Okay, so we just add a few names at the top. Now I would like to talk about the update screen function because it's got a little something new in there that we have not seen before, and they just kind of threw that in there. And asked you, what do you think it's doing? That would be on line 6, there's a .join, and in the parentheses of .join, there is a little \n character. It turns out that there are some other functions for lists that can be used using this dot notation. Instead of just calling a function and then putting a list in as a parameter, you can actually call certain functions on a particular list by using a dot notation. So there is this function called join that will take all the items in a list and join them together, concatenate them really, so that it returns to you a string containing all the elements in one big string. That's what dot join is doing. And whatever you put in the parentheses as a parameter to that function is what it's going to use as a delimiter between items. So the \n is going to go between each of the names, and that's why when we use people list, to populate the people label text area, we use it with the dot join. It actually is not just each individual item being printed out there. It is one big string with all the names included, and between them, there's a new line character for each one. So that's a whole new thing to know about. Even line 7 is a sneaky little command we've never used before. Okay, wait, we have used set property a bunch of times, but I don't think we've ever set the options of a dropdown from within our code. Usually we set up the dropdowns in design mode, and they just stay with that same list of options the whole program, right? But this is pretty cool, showing that if you have a list of items that are able to be kind of put into the options dropdown, that the options is a property of a dropdown. So you can use a list to set the options of a dropdown. That's something to make a mental note of. We can do that from now on if we want to. So you can change what's the options in a dropdown on the fly in the middle of your program. And that's what that's doing. So a couple of other things we should get out of this app just the way it is. When someone clicks the add person button, this goes through the typical routine of getting input from the user, right? On line 11, we get the person's name from the person input box. We get it as text using the get text function. We store it into a variable called new person. Then we use our new command called insert item to actually put that new person into the people list, and we're putting them at index 0. So that means at index 0, they're going to be ending up in the top of the list. So if I go and add myself to this list, put my name and click add, I end up at the top because that's index 0, the first item. Now my name is in the list. And if you were to go down to the watchers area and notice, I actually think they have set up for us a watcher for the list. And as I entered my name there, it shows up in the list. Okay, so always keep in mind, these are some good tools to be able to check what's going on in the debug area. Now I'd like to kind of explore what is going on. Oh, the remove person button also does kind of a typical sequence of instructions, just what you would expect. It's going to remove the person from the list, whoever you've chosen. But how does it do that? First of all, whoever you select from the drop-down menu, that name is associated with an index even in the drop-down options, because the options that are showing up in the drop-down are by definition a list. So every drop-down menu has a list of items and they are indexed starting at 0. So if you want to figure out, like, let's say we want to delete Michael because he's not here today. Okay, sorry, Michael. Just in case he watches on videotaping for those who are absent. But anyway, let's see. We're going to basically ask the compiler to go to the people dropdown and retrieve what's the current index that it is showing. So right now it is showing Michael, who is at index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 is what would be returned by this get property, because it's getting us the index of the current item in the dropdown. That's a new command we've never seen before. We've never used get property. Now we're seeing it in this program. You can get a property of an item. Okay. And depending on what that property is, if that property was a text, then it would return to you like a string. If that property is a number, like the index, then it returns to you a number. So we're getting that number, we're putting it into a variable, and then we're using that index to remove that person from the people list. The person at index, person index. And then we update the screen to show he's no longer there. So there I go, I click remove. Now we are back to this list, no Michael. And you'll notice he came out of the list down here in the watcher also. One more function here to unpack what's going on, that is the random assign button. Okay. This function, if you just look inside this if statement, it's doing most of the work of picking a random person and removing them from the list, and then picking another random person and removing them from the main list, and then taking those two random people and putting them in a pair at the bottom, right? That's where all the work is happening. But there is this whole if-else statement. Why do we have to say if people list.length is greater than or equal to 2? What if it was not greater than or equal to 2? Well, then there's not enough people to make a pair. So we have that as a protection against trying to get 2 people when there aren't even 2 people to get. So that's a nice little thing to use the length of the list to check whether this is a valid thing to do. If a person clicks random assign button, but they only have 1 person in the list, they cannot make a pair. And we're going to just tell them that and do nothing else. We will update the screen, but it's not going to change because we didn't do anything new, right? But if there is enough people to make at least 1 pair at the point that a person clicks the random pair button, then what's happening is we're going to create a random number, and the range of values for that random number needs to be starting at 0 and going to list of length minus 1. I mean, length of list minus 1. The reason is length of list minus 1 is the highest index that you can access in the list. That's a really common and important concept to get. The highest index that you can try to access validly without error is list.length minus 1. Whatever the length of list is, subtract 1, that's your highest index. So we want to keep the random number we're generating between 0 and that highest index. And then use that index to go into the list at that random number and pick whoever's there. So by generating a random index, you're getting a random person out of the list. And we're storing that person in this variable, random person 1. And we don't construct the pair quite yet because we need another person, but we do remove that person from the list. And we don't have to worry about losing their name because we stored it in a variable here temporarily. So we do that twice, then we can output their names, but they really have gone away from the list. After that is done, we would not be able to retrieve who those people were. They're showing up in the bottom here as a pair, but they're no longer in our list. Okay, so that's the whole program. Now, were you able to change it to group? Make a group of more people? Raise your hand if you got that done. You changed it to be more than 2 people. Oh, yeah? How many did you decide to go with? 3?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's 4 of you here who did not do it yet. Let's do it together, okay? It's not really that hard. This is the main area we have to make changes. We have to make sure if we're gonna do a group of 3, that there's at least 3 people. So we should change that 2 on line 24 to a 3. And then basically, we just need to do all this stuff about, getting a random person from the list and removing them from the list. We just have to do that one more time. And the way it's written, we've got the first set of, these commands look repetitive, don't they? We have 3 lines of code that are almost identical, except for the names of the variables have either a 1 or a 2 in them. So I'm just gonna copy and paste and change the 1s or the 2s, change them to 3. All right, I'll take the 2. I do copy paste with, Control C, Control V. It just goes quicker to me in text mode. I'm changing all the 2s to 3s. Now I have a 3rd random person that I got out of the list. And I could just add them to the bottom here. And I'm even going to copy this section, the and just change it to random person 3. Now there's a few places where the word pair is used. So if you were going to change this app to be like a, getting a random group of 3, you might want to change the prompts on the screen, like, add more people to make a group. All right. And maybe in design mode, you might want to change the title, the text of that label to just say group maker. And the button, you might want to say assign a random group. Just so it's consistent and it doesn't promise a pair when it's actually going to return 3 people. So let me try running this now, and I'm just going to click assign a random group. And there we go. I got Josh, Aiden, and Gia. And you could change up, like maybe just put a comma here instead of 2 ands, but you got your group of 3, and they came off the list, no longer in the people list at the top. And there we go. I think this app is an awesome little utility. Like teachers could clearly use this app if they were able to just put their class list at the top and they wanted to be able to assign random groups of 3. They could use this app. And so I want to encourage you, whenever you see something like I connected this because I'm a teacher, and sometimes I've wanted to make groups and I don't want to always let people work with just the same person every time. So sometimes I wanted to, create groups, but I don't want to have to think too hard about who's going to work with who or put my bias into who I think would be best working together. Sometimes random is good. So I might actually use this. And I want to encourage you, if you ever see an app that you think you could use as an idea, like a seed for your idea for the create task, keep track of that. For instance, you could click on the remix button, and if you do that, it puts it into your project area, and it becomes a new copy that you could work on later in the future. So I'm telling all my students this, when we get to the point where we have to do a create task, you're supposed to come up with your own idea for an app. But there is no requirement that it doesn't start with another good idea that you modify. So, if you see something along the way that you say, this has potential, I could make something much better out of this than what it even is. Save it for later. The only requirement for that is you don't want to plagiarize. So you don't want to take exactly something from a code.org lesson and claim it as your own project. Because they will recognize it. First of all, the graders of the tasks, they will be like, oh, that's a code.org lesson project, looks exactly like it. But if you take something and you add a bunch of stuff to it and make it your own, and you give credit to the portions that you started with from code.org, like you put comments in there saying, I started with, you know, Unit 5, Lesson 3, pair maker, and then I made it this better, whatever, you know, I added this code, I added this function, I added this, you know, design part, that's perfectly acceptable. As long as you give credit where credit is due, and you add enough to it that the portions you add to it satisfy the criteria of the project, then you could start with someone else's idea and make it better. Okay, so that's just something a little I wanted to mention now, so that as you see more and more samples of apps, you can keep in mind, I got to come up with an idea of my own. Maybe I would base it on something that I've seen before. It's sometimes easier. Innovation is not always from scratch. A lot of times innovation is just a modification or a change to something that does already exist that makes it even better. So, especially if you're intimidated by the concept of, you know, creating an app from scratch. I don't know what to do. Well, you could just take something that struck a chord with you and work with it. Okay, so that was the pair maker app. I also want to just take a quick look at those two patterns at the end of that list. I mean, that lesson. The first one is what we just saw in the pair maker app, randomly accessing items in a list. This is a common pattern program that you would set up a list and then you would generate a random number to have an index into the list to pick something out and do something with it. Just the most important thing here is to know that if you're going to do that, the random number needs to be generated so that it is within the boundaries of the list. The indexes run from 0 to list.length -1. So that's a good range to put in for your min and max of the random number. And then secondly, this is going back to the earlier app in that lesson, the top and bottom scroller outfit picker. That had a list scrolling pattern. So quick review of that. If you were going to create some sort of functionality where the user could scroll through a list, and let's say you have a left button, which would probably indicate that they want to go forward in the list closer to the beginning, right? Then you want to protect your index variable from ever going less than 0. So this is important to put a check on it. If index is greater than 0, then you can subtract 1 from it. But if it's already 0, you would not want to do that, because then if your index variable goes to a -1 or anything else negative, and you try to use it to access an element of the list, you will get an error. It would be a compile error or a runtime error. It would be index out of bounds error. Okay, and it would probably just quit the program at that point or freeze up. So you want to avoid that by putting these conditions to check. And also on the right-hand side, if you're trying to allow the person to advance through the list going towards the end, you want to always keep checking each time whether you are already at the highest index being list.length -1. As long as you are less than that, it's okay to add 1 to the index, because then it would possibly take you up to the highest index. But if you're already at the highest index, you know, you want to make sure this says less than, not less than or equal to. So if you're already at the highest index, you don't want to add 1 to it, because that'll take you off the edge, the end of the list, and into territory where there's nothing, no elements, and you get another index out of bounds error. So there's a nice check to put on that. This is a common pattern to just recognize. You got to protect your ends of your array, your lists, your index variable from going off the end. Okay. So after lesson 2, if you click continue into lesson 3, you will see that you basically have 13 levels of lesson 3. to be introduced to the syntax again, actually type it in yourself, play around with it, do what they ask you to do. These are the challenges for today. I would like you to try to complete lesson 3 today. That's your whole classwork. You have an hour. If you get stuck for too long on any one thing, of course, talk to each other, talk to me, raise your hand. I'm here to help, but I am going to let you encounter these on your own. So, don't stay stuck for too long before you reach out. Especially if if you start to talk to someone, sometimes, it just comes to you or you just figure it out on your own. There's that fun thing that happens. So, yeah, that's it. If you don't finish this lesson in class today, then that'll be your homework to finish it. But I really think you could get it done if you focus. Okay. I'm going to work on trying to get those tests back to you. I still have to grade some of it that we took on Monday. But please interrupt me if you need help.